So, Joe, I think a theme for this evening's Q&A will be the uncanny prescience of your film, The Burbs. But before I get into that, I just want to ask, we set this movie up as one of the great films about American suburbs. So I'd like to begin by asking you about your own life experience and its relationship to and distance from the psychic real estate that is suburbia. What did you bring to this film? An outsider's perspective or someone steeped in the folkways and customs of the cul-de-sac?
Well, first I'd like to tell you that Satan is not our pal. Some people's pal, people in the White House even. But I grew up in the suburbs, and as many of my contemporaries did. And the interesting thing to me when I first read the script, which was originally called Bay Window, was that I remember that in the various neighborhoods I had lived in, there was always a house that everybody thought was either haunted or full of weirdos. And it seemed to strike a bell. And when I would talk to other people about doing the movie, people said, well, yeah, I think we had those kind of people too. Now, whether or not they were really weirdos or whether it was just us, that was intriguing, I thought. And so I brought a little bit of that to this movie, but this was a movie that I made after another comedy that I'd made, Interspace, and I guess the reason that Ron Howard and his partner came to me for this was that, well, he did a comedy, so he could do another comedy, which is better than usual for me, because usually he did a horror picture, so let's give him another horror picture. But this one was, I thought, a really interesting project. The problem with it was that we had to shoot it during a writer's strike, and Dana Olson, who wrote the script, was not available to do rewrites or to do anything official on the movie. So in the movie, the scene where Carrie Fisher comes back to the neighborhood, there's a cop who's trying to keep her from coming back in the neighborhood. That's Dana. And it's because we wanted to have Dana around. I always try to have the writer around whenever it's possible. But for the most part, we were really pretty much stuck with shooting a movie on the Universal backlot during a period where there was almost nothing shooting except our movie. And a lot of the stuff that's in the movie, not that the script wasn't really good, because it was, and there's a lot of really good material in it, but a lot of it was made up by the actors because we shot in sequence. And so a lot of it was kind of ad-libbed, and some of the funniest things in the movie were things that were ad-libbed by the actors during takes, and we would do another take and maybe we'd come up with something different. And as a result, it's probably the loosest movie that I've ever done. And despite the incredibly bad reviews it got when it came out, it has turned out to be something of a cult classic.
Jody, can you remember any of the moments from the movie that were ad-libbed by any of the actors?
Well, there's a scene, the thing about ad-libs is that sometimes they're not even on screen. And when Bruce Dern is talking about the piping in the Klopek house, and Brother Theodore says a bunch of strange things, and Bruce says, that's about a 9 on the tension scale. It's completely made up. It wasn't even on camera.
I have to say, the other two, it kind of makes sense. I mean, Tom Hanks was in Big, but how do you get Bruce Dern to be a 10-year-old boy? That was amazing, even the body language.
Well, Bruce was always one of my favorite actors, and I'd never worked with him before, and he was a constant presence on the set in terms that he's a crew person. He loves to engage the crew, and he would have these football pools and these trivia contests and all this stuff. And believe me, you can't win a trivia contest with Bruce Dern. He knows everything about everything that's ever happened, and it was so much fun. I mean, it was really a lot of fun because there was nobody to interfere with us. I mean, we were just making this crazy movie that we had no idea would be, a hit, which it kind of was, largely because of Tom's notoriety at the time. But over the years, despite the incredibly terrible reviews it got, it's really it's got its own website. It's got chat rooms. There's a lot of people who really love this movie and know the dialogue.
We talked about Tom Hanks, who this is right in the middle of his period in the late '80s when he was playing just like incredibly uptight pricks in basically every movie, like Splash and Man with One Red Shoe, and this one just like always just on the verge of snapping. First thing you see him do is throw the coffee at the paper play, and Bruce Dern, of course. But where did you get Rick Duke? Because he really does, in my opinion, steal the movie as art, and you know he was like a Canadian stand-up comedian, I think, before that.
Rick was a Canadian stand-up comedian. I had never heard of him before, and a lot of fairly well-known actors wanted that part. I mean, comedians whose names you'd know, but there was something about Rick, whose personality was a little abrasive,
A little.
that really worked for the part, and he and Tom worked so well together, even though they didn't really like each other. And I think you can see that in the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But it's, I mean, he's kind of the heart and soul of the movie because he's really hilarious. And I was surprised that, apart from some roles in things like Groundhog Day and some other things, that he didn't really pursue the idea of being a comic actor star. He went back to stand-up, and he was also he came from a very well-off background, so it wasn't like he needed the money. He was just doing this because that's what he wanted to do.
This was, okay, so 89, the satanic ritual abuse panic was like well underway. There was that kind of established fear of satanic sacrifices. And I mean, like, I figured Dana Olson had to be aware of that. You had to be aware of that. You talk about the bad reviews. Was there any, like, you know, PRMC, like, how dare you? Like, this is a very serious subject? Or what was the bad reviews?
The reviews weren't based on the fact that it was, you know, satanic or anything like that. I mean, they weren't.
Well, they should have been.
They weren't Christian-oriented reviews. But they were just reviews that this movie stinks. And, the review in the New York Times, which is one of my favorites to remember, was, this movie is as empty as a movie can be without creating a vacuum. You don't really forget reviews like that. But as you know, as befits this screening, I mean, many of you have probably seen this movie before, and you've probably seen it on video or on television or, you know, whatever. But there's no substitute for seeing a movie like this with an audience, because it makes a huge difference. I mean, this was invented to be, as most comedies are, a movie to be seen with an audience who can relate to it and whose laughter is infectious. And I just would recommend that anybody who wants to see this kind of movie look for revivals and try to see them with an audience.
Well, yeah, I mean, that reminds me of when we did Gremlins 2 with you. And that was an incredible experience to see Gremlins 2 with an audience, which I had never done before. But like all the jokes in it killed. And one of the things we talked about with Gremlins 2 is like the eerie ways in which that movie basically created, predicted, prophesied Donald Trump and the rise of like mega media corporations. But this movie too, in its portrayal of essentially, like, you know, now 30 plus years on, its portrayal of a group of terminally bored man children whose paranoia drives them to, like, essentially to be right, but for the wrong reasons. And I just think that that's like a very uncanny metaphor for America in 2022. Paranoid idiots who are essentially by accident right about something.
Are you saying that the characters in this movie are MAGA?
Well, Bruce Dern's character is definitely. I want to get into some of the other casts in this movie, starting with the Klopeks, the real stars of this film. as Hans Klopek, you have Courtney Gaines, who I remember mostly for playing the kid in Children of the Corn that says, Outlander, Outlander, I want your blood.
He's a go-to for a lot of talk about turning lemonade from lemons. He's like, I'm the most off-putting redhead in the world, and I'm going to turn it into an art.
He's sort of like the Caliban figure to Dr. Mengele and his brother.
Great.
But,
He's great.
What was it? Do you remember how Courtney Gaines got cast, or what you were looking for that role?
I had seen Children of the Corn, and we did see some sort of semi-emaciated kind of people to play that part. But Courtney had a very good sense of humor, and he was really funny, and he worked when we did rehearsals and stuff. He really worked well with Bruce Dern, and he was the Klopek from Word Go.
The wardrobe was amazing for him. He looked like an Alpine boy Hummel figurine from hell.
Pinocchio.
Yeah.
Next one, what I really want to talk about is Brother Theodore as Uncle Reuben. Is anyone familiar with Brother Theodore before this movie? I mean, what a life story that this guy has had.
Amazing.
He survived Dachau to become sort of an oddball comedian in America, and he called himself a stand-up tragic. And so,
Google
how did you find
Letterman appearances. That's really great.
How did you find Brother Theodore, and what was it like working with him in this movie?
Well, I was aware of Brother Theodore because I'm from the East Coast, and he used to do a midnight series of shows that he would do in various places, and he had a particularly eccentric act, as you might imagine, with that voice, and the kind of act where people could never tell whether is this guy for real, is this guy serious? I mean, but he had honed it down to a fine act, and he did some radio, and he was a sort of a personality on the East Coast, but I don't think he was very well known on the West Coast. And we saw a lot of people for that part. We saw Timothy Carey from Paths of Glory. We saw him. A number of heavies, quote unquote. But there was something about Brother Theodore that was Klopekian. And the downside was that he was almost completely deaf. So in order to hit his lines, when we did the rehearsing, Carrie Fisher would have to yell her line so that he could get the, and then after a couple of takes he would sort of pick up on what he was supposed to do, but his delivery was very like this, and he was it was for a guy who was from his background and quite eccentric. He was a lot of fun. He had a minder. We had a young guy who sort of helped him out and made sure that he got there and went home and all that kind of thing. But he's a definite asset to the movie.
I remember a Letterman appearance he did where he said, "I am living in eternal youth. I am in the prime of my senility."
And then, of course, as the Dr. Mengele figure, the great Henry Gibson. I mean, was that sort of like a throwback, like a lot of your movies, to sort of like the classic, like horror, like weird exploitation movies?
Well, Henry, John Landis turned me on to Henry because he had worked with him in the Blues Brothers, and I, of course, had seen him on Laugh-In, and he'd been working for years. In fact, he's in The Nutty Professor. I mean, he had been doing a lot of pictures, but we first worked together on Inner Space, and he was very funny and very bright, and I just thought he was great. And when it came to cast this part, there's a certain eccentricity that he has, and also a gentility that seemed to be perfect for this guy who's seemingly mild-mannered, but might be a serial killer. So who knows? I think he's really good in this movie, and in fact, I think everybody is good in this movie. I mean, it's one of the best cast movies that I've ever done.
And also, a wonderful cast. Also, an amazing score, I have to say. Jerry Goldsmith there.
Yeah.
There's so many. You've got Rumsfeld's little Marshall ditty that comes when he comes on stage, and you got the organs and everything, and then the plinky little, nice ironic suburban thing. How was putting that together? How did that work?
Something's moving. It's
Yeah.
the him exiting the flaming building.
Yeah.
Well, by this time I had worked with Jerry a number of times, and when I first gave him the rough cut, giving a rough cut with a temp score to composers is always a little iffy because composers hate temp scores. They don't want to hear somebody else's music, and even worse, they don't want to hear their own music. But you can't run the movie for the executives without some kind of music. So I had temped the movie with Italian Western music, because I thought that's the way that the lead characters saw themselves. And so there was a lot of Morricone in it. And so Jerry picked up on that, because a lot of his themes for Tom Hanks are part of his sort of Western themed kind of thing. But the one thing that he couldn't quite master was the scene where they're walking up to the Clopagos the first time, and we zoom into all these people's eyes like in a Leone movie. And we had used a track from Morricone's score to My Name Is Nobody, and we had edited the scene to that track. And no matter how Jerry tried to imitate it, he was just not Ennio Morricone. So he did a lot of the kind of themes that you hear for Ray when he comes out of the house, and that kind of, Western kind of themes, but he never could hit the notes the way that to make the scene funny. So we just decided to go ahead and buy the Morricone music. So for that scene, that track is actually from another movie.
Well, the tight close-up on Queenie the dog in like the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly style standoff that was a very, very tight gag in the movie. But it's like in Gremlins 2, you have a character like Clamp, played by John Glover, which is like self-consciously styled on Donald Trump. So like the parallels there are obvious.
But that was before we knew what a traitorous asshole.
Just sort of a funny asshole. But in this movie, like the happy accident of having Bruce Stern's character be named Rumsfeld, was this just like you sort of imbibing, or Dana Olson like sort of subconsciously receiving a message from the future about our future Secretary of Defense?
I think that's all it could be, because I don't think that Dana knew who Rumsfeld was at the time.
Well, not his conscious mind, but like in our dream state, we can receive messages from the future, I think.
Well, he did exist.
Next up in the movie, Corey Feldman is like a very important character you have to have in any suburban neighborhood. The kind of latchkey, heavy metal teen who loves pizza and partying. But another thing I noticed about his character watching it this time is that when he's like goes out on his balcony with his girlfriend and he's like, why do you want to watch TV or movies? Like TV's just as boring as movies. This is reality. He is predicting the rise of reality TV replacing scripted entertainment, where like people don't want to see scripted stories. They just want to witness the lives and pathologies of their crazy neighbors in the suburbs. Like, anything about like Corey Feldman's character and this idea of like him being kind of a voyeur and entertained by everyday life rather than TV or movies.
See, one of the things that I liked about it is that when you watch this not in a theater, you still feel like you have another audience member, but it's Corey Feldman watching with you.
Well, if you're suggesting that anything in this movie could predict reality TV, it's offensive.
Well, there's sort of like I said, it's maybe not consciously, but I think through art we can receive messages that only through time can be interpreted correctly.
Well, but I'm a firm believer that movies are not understood when they're new. that you have to, it's like wine, they have to age. And there are so many movies that we love today that were dismissed and derided and didn't make any money when they were new, and now we think they're classics. And partly it's because of we aren't who those people were then. We're now the people that we are now, and we look back on the things that have happened to us and to the world with a different view, and that's why film noir, which used to be a kind of a also ran genre, a bunch of second features, is now a major genre, because it's so indicative of post-war America and what had happened to us and what was happening to us, and it's so much more meaningful now than it appeared to be to the people who were living in the middle of it.
Well, I mean, on a maybe lower brow comparison to that, like you're a big like Chuck Jones fan, right? So like that, like walking out of a burning building with like Wile E. Coyote style, even the electrocution, that I just love the actual cartoon style violence of that.
Well, there's a lot of cartoon stuff in my movie. I mean, even, when you look at the top of the
manhole, the man-sized hole.
I've done that joke at least 3 times. It's always good.
Yeah.
That one always kills. And then we have a Carrie Fisher as the wife, and I guess like my only the thing I was
As
interested
the wife/mother.
Yeah, as the wife/mother. That was one of those, like, was there any effort to like downplay her essential hotness, or was that just how women's hair looked in the 80s?
Well, it is very 80s, but she plays the only sane character in the
Yeah.
entire movie, and I was a huge fan, and I had done another picture with her, and we used to go out. I mean, she was a wonderful person and a terrific actress, and I think that she grounds this picture. I think she is like the only thing in the movie that like at least something in the picture makes sense.
Well, it's like when Art says to him, he says, "You're gonna listen to your wife? Nobody listens to their wives. You should listen to me." You're deranged man-child neighbor. When Matt and I rewatched this in preparation for the scene that killed us, and still this is like the first scene with Art where he comes in their kitchen and just keeps eating their food, and then he comes out with a full pineapple and ribs out of their fridge. And then there's a repeated joke. He keeps looking for food, and like the guy thinks has been murdered house.
Also, if you think they're murderers, and like, there's probably cold beer in the fridge. Don't leave any evidence of you having been in their house.
He liked to eat.
And then I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up like the sort of the interjection of the garbage men, who were played by the sort of the Joe Dante repertory players. Yeah, the Joe Dante players. Robert Picardo and the great Dick Miller. Like their interjection in this movie is very funny because they're like, to me, I interpret like this is like the working class coming into this suburban bubble. And Matt, like you put it out, Picardo has a Eugene McCarthy button on him.
That's like the old and the new left,
And
just
he's
hanging out, taking up
or
garbage.
something too. Yeah.
They used to be in one of the many endings that we didn't use. They used to be in the back of the car when they opened the trunk. Because at the time there was this thing called the Chowchilla kidnapping, where a bunch of kids had been kidnapped by somebody and buried, cheerleaders, I think they were. And so we did a version with cheerleaders too. We did a couple of different versions of the ending. This one, now that I look at it, is probably better than the other ones that we did. But some of them are lost in time, which is maybe not such a bad thing.
And finally, of course, America's sweetheart, America's dad, Tom Hanks. And really, one of a great Tom Hanks performance. He just pulls off some amazing physical comedy in this movie.
The
The scene
where he's got like half of his face, like I don't know how he did that. Like it's just all of it is in one cheek, like he's just twitching while he's sneezing with the packing dust.
we were dying when him getting so frustrated that he just crushes 2 beer cans. It's twice. It's like expression of like impotent.
Totally.
It's like how a
rage, yeah.
toddler gets angry. Squeeze their fist.
But what I was talking about this is like, this was like when Tom Hanks was mainly doing comedic roles, but like I found his performance in this movie and the way you directed it is like it's kind of a sly subversion of like the Tom Hanks everyman character, because it really shows this kind of like very unsettled, unstable reservoir beneath this placid exterior.
He really ate those sardines. Tom was great. I mean, he had already done Big, but it hadn't been released yet. And in fact, I think he left our set one night to go to the premiere. And I'm not, I'm not self-delusional enough to think that one of the reasons the picture did well when it opened was because of the publicity around Big. But it's, and I think had he done Dragnet before this, or did he do? I
I
can't
think
remember.
before, yeah, like 88, I think, right now.
But I was thrilled to work with him. He was a terrific actor and so much fun. And the whole shoot was like a lot of fun because there was nobody bothering us. We were all up there in Universal all by ourselves and able to do whatever we wanted, and it didn't cost a lot of money. And the set already existed for the most part. In fact, it still does exist, a lot of it up there. So,
Wait, can we go to the Universal Studios
Yeah.
store and see Hinkley Hills?
I don't think they talk about the Burbs anymore, but that was the Desperate Housewives set for many years.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Wow. Well, suburbia lives on. The nightmare of American cul-de-sacs continues. I guess just like, I talked at the beginning about the triumvirate of the three leads in this movie with Tom Hanks, Dukeman, and Bruce Dern. I'm just wondering, like, how do you view them, like, 30 years on as these kind of like archetypes of like American thwarted masculinity and like Arrested Development? One of my favorite scenes in the movie is when Dukeman and Bruce Dern are outside Tom Hanks' house and they're like, "Can he come out and play?" And then he's like, they sort of like sheepishly look at their feet and kick as they walk away. But like, they're essentially like, they're so thrilled to just even suspect that their neighbors are serial killers. It's like the best thing that's ever happened to them. When Bruce Dern goes, "We are green for me." What does he say? Like,
We are on alert.
we are on alert. Yeah. So like, how do you view like the three main characters as this kind of like archetypes of American suburbia?
Well, there's nothing going on in their lives. I mean, this is the biggest thing, that's ever happened to them. Otherwise, it's all very placid and every day is the same, and it's, they're kind of bored. I mean, obviously he's bored. He doesn't want to go to lake with his wife, see the guy with the big head or whatever, because they've done that, and it's like, what's left in life,
Yeah.
and this is now a diversion. And
Now being left to their own devices is downright dangerous.
yeah, so I think that explains a lot about our current political situation.
Yes.
Well,
Go ahead.
What?
okay. No, I was gonna say like the line at the end of the movie that's like the most prophetic, if you want to talk about our current political situation or MAGA America, is when Dukeman's being interviewed by the media and he says, he's like, "The lesson here is all these psychos don't mess with suburbanites because we're not content to just wash our cars and mow our lawns. We're going after them. We're getting after it." So it's like this id being unleashed of like once the boredom has become the boredom and safety of life has become so totally complete, they need to go abroad to seek out monsters to destroy among themselves, like that classic Twilight Zone episode.
Am I supposed to disagree?
But it's right after, like, there's this very beautiful, like Tom Hanks speech where he's like saying, like, we are the paranoid psychos. They just happen to be correct this one time.
I was also taken by the end of the movie how essentially easy Carrie Fisher lets Tom Hanks off the hook for doing the exact thing she told him not to do and nearly killing himself.
Over and over again.
But he likes her new hair.
Yeah, there you go.
It's literally, it's just a soft, women are such a soft touch.
Like after he has literally blown himself up and is about to go to jail, and she's being very nice and kind to him. At that point, I thought she's doing this because she's realizing, oh, I will never lose another argument with this man for the rest of my life. I will just be like, everything he says is like, oh no, you don't want to do that? Remember the time you blew up her neighbor's house and went to jail?
And that whole thing with Tom and the taking the stretcher and putting it in jail.
Yeah.
Totally made up. Totally improvised by Tom.
That was good. That's just so perfectly a black. He lies on the thing and then he can't even wait a second for someone to even come to get. He just has to throw it right there.
Was there anything like watching this movie again, or like coming into at least half of it, that you were surprised at the way the audience reacted, or just anything that you pick up on or like interpret differently seeing it this time?
Well, I don't usually attend these screenings and watch the whole movie because I've seen them. But in this case, I came in about halfway through, and it seemed to be playing just fine.
All right. But I guess my last question is we gotta get the next showing in here. This is unrelated to the Burbs, but this is Joe Dante news that I have to get your take on, because it was not until you pointed it out that I realized how much Grogu from Mandalorian is just a blatant ripoff of Gizmo. Well, I was talking about it, they
They
shaved
shaved the
Gizmo.
Mogwai. They shaved Gizmo, and then they try to act like geniuses. It's amazing.
What do you say about Grogu ripping off Gizmo and the state of the TV and movie industry today?
That has certainly become this gigantic story. I mean, Jesus Christ, all I did, I mentioned it. I said, well, I think it's kind of a ripoff. And then all of a sudden, every time I go on the internet, it says, Joe Dante says that this is ripped off from Gizmo, and it's like, who cares?
Everyone wants to believe that their generation's cute little guy is special and new.
Well, in the case of Grogu, he same shape as Gizmo,
Yeah.
makes the same sounds as Gizmo.
Same
Come on, it's a total ripoff. And who's one of the producers? Kathleen Kennedy.
Oh.
She's also one of the producers of Gremlins.
They just dump some nair on him.
But yeah, Grogu doesn't do anything fun, like spawn other Grogus that are evil and destroy society.
It is a superior
Yeah.
little critter.
Not a contest.
All right, you have any final thoughts on there, you guys?
No,
Okay, we're good.
Yeah.
Joe Dante, I want to thank you so much for doing this. I'd also like to thank our good friend Josh Olson and Grant from American Cinemathe.
Oh, by the way, speaking
speaking
of Josh Olson,
Yeah.
he will kill me if I don't plug my podcast that I do with Josh, which is called The Movies That Made Me. It's on the Trailers from Hell website. It's on Instagram. It's a great great podcast that we are in like 200 episodes into. So
Great, it has a ton of good guests.
definitely
Yeah.
worth.
Yeah.
If you want to hear really, really cool guests talk about their favorite movies, for all my movie addicts out there trying to further imbibe or kick the habit, you can taper off with Movies That Made Me. So once again, I want to thank American Cinemathe and Joe Dante for joining us here tonight to screen his movie. Thank you so much, everyone.